Okay, so I'm here with my mom, Judy Flohr, previously known as Judy Waxman. Some people knew her back in the day as Judy Waxman, but you go by Judy Flohr these days, right? Um, so, even though you're my mom, I'm going to call you Judy for the interview, just to make it a little less awkward for the viewer and for us. So, Judy, how did you find Macrobiotics?
I guess I was aware that food was important, and I was kind of floundering about trying to figure out, what was right. When I somehow, through friends, ended up in Philadelphia at a little restaurant called The Commons, which served macrobiotic food. That was around in the 60s, middle 60s, no, early 60s. And there I started to work there and help there just as a friend, and I moved to Philadelphia. And through learning macrobiotics first over there, through connections that I made in the restaurant, I ended up in Boston and ended up at the Cushy House and ended up Aveline's helper.
So that's Michio and Aveline.
Michio and Aveline, yeah.
And they had a house in Brookline.
They had a study house in Brookline, Boston. And I just helped Aveline every day, every single day. And I went to lectures and I lived there. And I learned.
And who else was there at that time?
Let's see. Anne Riegel, Eric Otney, Jim Ledbetter, Peggy Winter, and Peggy, I forget her name.
And did all these people study with Michio and Aveline?
Yes. They lived in the house.
They lived in the house. You all lived in the house.
We all lived in the house, and there were several other study houses full of people.
You said, how old were you?
I was about 19 in Philadelphia, around 20 when I ended up in Boston.
And just for some perspective, you are how old now?
73.
So it was a long time ago.
A long time ago, yeah.
So go on.
So there were several study houses, all overseen, all students of Michio and Aveline. And we learned a lot. We learned about food, we learned about, Asian culture, medicine. We learned about, I personally learned a lot about taking care of children in a certain way that I wasn't aware of before, because Isawa Kushi was just a baby. He was 3 years old at the time. Just the way Aveline treated the child, and the gentleness of it, as opposed to the harshness that I was used to seeing, was a very deep impression on me.
Nice.
Yeah.
What was Macrobiotics like in those days?
Oh my gosh, it was so strict.
Yeah.
So very, very strict. I mean, lightly cooked vegetables were just considered a no-no.
Yeah, it seems so strange, so foreign.
And so much salt.
Yeah.
And also there wasn't much available. In the misos, there was only hacho miso. There was no organic food at all.
And that's something that macrobiotic practitioners had a big part in, right? Bringing organics and health foods to America.
Well, again, Aveline started Erewhon.
Okay.
And when Paul Hawken lived with us too.
Okay.
When Paul Hawken took over Erewhon, he started contacting various farmers and arranging certain guarantees that he would buy their organic produce and grain, mostly grain, I believe, in the beginning.
Grain first, yeah.
Yeah. And Lumberg was one of those. Lumberg also worked with Chico-san.
And And a lot of the original health food stores were started by macrobiotic practitioners, right?
No, no. Erewhon West and Erewhon in Boston were macrobiotic. Your father, you know, started Isin,
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying.
but there weren't too many others that I know of.
Were there other health food stores that were not related to the macrobiotic community?
Yeah, they were mostly vitamins and
Right.
yeast and things like
Okay.
that.
Hard to call that. I mean, I guess it's health related.
But that's what it was.
But
in
it's not
those
like
days.
organic food.
No.
The macrobiotics played a big part in establishing the organic whole foods movement.
Yeah, and the stores that carry not just vitamins, but you know, fresh produce and grains and a whole variety of healthy things.
Right.
Healthy foods.
That is a big part of what I call health foods and health food stores. So, yeah.
Yes, it participated very strongly in creating a trend.
And what was your sort of experience with the Kushis and macrobiotics like in the early days?
There was a lot of devotion and excitement. You know,
Mhm.
everybody was so excited about finding this thing that we were all hungry for. You know, we all wanted something different, and we all wanted meaning that we couldn't find elsewhere.
Yeah, I sort of remember that. There was a lot of buzz in like the early days. I remember as a kid kind of like feeling like macrobiotics was like this buzzword, and there was so much excitement about it, and people were very excited to be, you know, involved in macrobiotics and to be eating this way and living this way, and there was a lot of activity back in the early days.
Yeah. There was some trouble too because the diet was so strict.
Right. Yeah, I know that.
I
Trouble
feel-
for us kids too,
Yeah, you remember.
but there was trouble. Well, tell me about the trouble. What was your experience of that?
Well, some people were discharging too fast.
Okay, what does that mean?
For instance, like sores on the arm or trouble with bad things on the leg or
Uh-huh.
just in general. For me, what it was intense, unbearable, constant fatigue. And the thing is that the Kushis weren't too familiar with Western constitutions at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So they kept telling me that I was too in and advised me to take more and more yang until finally I got sick with a fever and everything, and I turned around, you know, I said, I don't care. I'm just going to take like lightly cooked summer squash and saltless cornmeal.
Those Japanese, I mean, they can really take a lot of salt.
Yeah.
But so then you're saying that you advised yourself and you healed yourself outside of sort of macrobiotic recommendations at that time.
Yeah, I went back to Grandpa and Grandma's house, and I just went on a very low salt, maybe even saltless diet of very lightly cooked vegetables and cornmeal without salt, and I got well.
And that was your own intuition guiding you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Nobody else's advice.
No. And I think by and by they began to understand Western Constitution, and
Mhm.
by and by we began to understand our own needs as well, and so macrobiotics progressed,
I'm just gonna push this a little bit.
and it is still progressing, I believe.
Oh yeah, I would
I
agree
hope.
with that. I mean, it has to if it's going to stay alive. Everything that's alive has to grow and evolve and change and adapt to changing environments and everything else. So, okay, what was after that? Like, how long did you stay at the Kushis?
I was there for about maybe 4 years, and after that, on and off, visiting, staying for a while, maybe staying for a year and coming back to New York, and after that, visiting for shorter periods, on and off, until Aveline, close to when Aveline passed away. I still lived there for a while, helping her.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
And you had kind of like a special relationship with Aveline, particularly, right? I mean,
Yeah.
very kind of close.
Yeah.
What was that like?
She's like a second mother.
Second mother, yeah.
Yeah. When we went to summer conference, I would come into the hotel. I came into the hotel one day when the owner came in, an Indian owner from India, and he turns to me and he says, "Oh, is this your mother?" And she chimes in and she says, "Yes."
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I did live at the Kushi house after I graduated high school when I was 19, so similar age. I didn't stay there for very long. It was a little over 2 weeks. I mean, I think it was closer to a month. But anyway, I would go shopping with Aveline, and she did have a very grandmother-like feeling to me, and it was very strange. I remember thinking she feels just like my grandmother. It's weird. But yeah, we would go shopping. It was just me and her, and I'd, drive her around and hold the shopping cart and follow her around. That was fun. So then, tell me about your experience outside the Kushi house with Macrobiotics. Like you ran several study houses, right?
We ran study houses, your father and I, from before the time we were married. As soon as we got together, well, he had a study house, and that's where I met him. And then...
Well, just briefly say what a study house is, what you mean by that.
Well, people who want to learn about macrobiotics would come and rent a room that would cover food and shelter and informal studies in the house through eating the food and helping out, plus more formal, semi-formal lectures, plus cooking classes.
Mm-hmm. And that was my early upbringing. I remember, growing up with lots of people around, strangers, sick people, people who were into macrobiotics. That was all around. So it was very interesting for me growing up at those times. But yeah, talk more about that. What were some of the interesting things that happened during those times?
Well, the thing that used to really, really amaze me and, delight me is that a person would come over, move in, and they would be of a certain quality, even down to their skin quality, even down to their voice quality, within a certain time, they would start changing so much. Their voice would clear up, their skin would become nice, their manner would become more mellow, and it was consistent.
Mm-hmm.
It was consistent to the point where I was very, very much convinced that this was the right way. But then, of course, what we found that when we continue over many years with the same regimen, it wasn't good. It needed change.
Yeah, right. Like people can't just eat too simply for too long because it develops problems, and can't overdo the seaweed, the salt, the whole grain, all of that. You need variety, you need change, you need to adapt, you need to grow, you need to balance with everything else in your life. So yeah, that's one of the things. And then there was Anthony Satellaro.
Yeah, Dr. Satellaro.
Talk about him.
He contacted your father, and
he was the head of what hospital in Philadelphia?
Methodist
Hospital.
I believe so.
The head of the whole hospital.
So.
Yeah. So
I'm not exactly sure, but he was prominent there.
And he had cancer.
Oh, he was given only a short time to live, and he was on acupuncture relief with this electronic device just to manage his pain. He was in great pain all the time. But he started to come and eat dinner with us every day and take food home. And within a while, the pain went away. He didn't need anything anymore for the pain. And he kept going back to the hospital for regular checkups, to see how it progressed. And eventually, all the symptoms cleared.
Now, he was eating a lot of your food, right?
He was eating at our study house at first, and then for a while at another study house, and then for a while at another study house. Then he went on his own, and he had some private cooks cook for him.
Oh.
And then he left. We didn't hear from him for a long time.
Was he better at that point when he left? Was he healed? Cured? Like, did
He
the
wa-
doctors say, like, no more cancer?
He was symptom-free at some point, yeah, completely.
And then what happened?
We lost touch with him, and we heard that he had passed away.
But before then, you forgot the good part. He got better, and he wrote a book, and Macrobiotics
Right.
blew up. You skipped that the whole good part.
I thought it was a.
No,
Everybody knows
no,
about that.
That's why we're doing. That's why
Okay, yeah. Anthony Settelaro with Tom Monte wrote a book, Recalled by Life, which is the story of Dr. Settelaro and his experience with macrobiotics.
Yeah, I mean the high point of the story is that he cured himself through macrobiotics of
Yes.
severe cancer, and he was given a death sentence.
Yes.
You know, the hospital said he was going to die, and he lived, and he got better, and then he went off the diet later,
Yeah,
and that's when he died.
he had a number of good years, and apparently that is what I hear. I don't know. Apparently he went off the diet and he passed away, but it was a decision that he made consciously.
Right. Yeah, he stopped eating. He's like eating all sorts of junk food, and then he got sick again.
He made a choice. Yeah.
But the book gained a lot of popularity for Macrobiotics. It was a New York Times bestseller, correct?
Was it?
I believe so. I'll have to verify. It was a very popular book.
It was, and
And-
it,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, and it was translated here and there as well.
And Macrobiotics received a lot of benefit from that, a lot of popularity.
Yeah. Unfortunately, though, from my point of view, it became a little too exclusive
How so?
concerning just sickness,
Right. Yeah.
instead of keeping an arm with prevention.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that because macrobiotics is not really just about healing from sickness. It has to be about a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah. And we were overwhelmed by cancer in particular,
Mm-hmm.
and it just didn't leave enough room for what macrobiotics could have done for, a lifestyle. Not completely, we didn't abandon it completely, but I think we would have done well, and we will do well if we focus on that some more.
Okay. So, for you personally, what made you decide to follow the macrobiotic way?
When I first found out about it, I wanted to be convinced, and I would go on the diet for several months and then off the diet for several months and on and off for long periods of time and compare how I felt. And that was my first step. I decided, okay, it works for me. I'll stick with it. But then after I moved to the study house, my next question was, all right, who else does it work for? Does it work for everyone? And I observed the changes, and I saw the same changes that I mentioned earlier about our study houses, with people's faces clearing. Not just the skin, the whole structure of the face would change. The excesses would go away, there would be more of a balance. And I was convinced, yes, this works. And then later, when sick people would start coming in and they would start improving, that was a further indication for me that this way was very right. And I was so convinced about it that I stuck to it very faithfully.
Maybe even rigidly?
Well, that's my point, that long term, that kind of a diet caused some problems, some unwelcome symptoms.
Well, you guys were pioneers. You guys were still figuring out the details, which we know we have a lot better idea about now.
Yes.
But it's trial by error. You don't know everything when you start something, and it was a new frontier for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So that's forgivable. And what about people's personalities? You talked about their faces changing and healing from sickness, but like their mind, their emotions. What were the influences there that you noticed?
It was hard to tell because there were so many of us,
Right.
But generally people seemed to become more mellow.
Just more calm and peaceful.
Yeah. Kind of rigid though.
Rigid in the early days. I can see that with a lot
Yeah.
of salt.
But we needed to be.
Right.
We needed to be because we were coming off of a diet that was so compelling because it was surrounding us everywhere. And there weren't any alternatives except what we would make at home. So people had to become very strict with themselves to adhere to this new way.
And a lot of the people, well, not a lot, there are a lot of people stuck with it, but a lot of people also left.
Yes.
And what are your thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, it has to do with the rigidity that was self-imposed and recommended, of course, and then self-imposed. And some people decided that it didn't work for them. And I think that their earlier studies didn't get lost. They just transferred it to something else which they didn't call macrobiotics. But eventually macrobiotics caught up with the wider range of foods, and I think that if those people had come into macrobiotics later, they may have stuck with it.
So nowadays there's this popular, the term whole foods plant-based diet, and it differentiates itself from vegan because it's not necessarily vegan, although it could be. It's just basically a diet that's based around whole foods, whole plant foods, which macrobiotics, I guess macrobiotic diet you could say falls under. But how would you differentiate what macrobiotics is versus just like a plant-based diet or a whole foods plant-based diet?
Well, macrobiotics has a very sound principle. The principle of contraction and expansion, yin and yang, and how foods create a balance between these two forces, between these two. There's a tension between these two, and the right tension helps us to function in an optimal capacity. So this is a principle that's not readily available in most diets. It's present in Chinese understanding of food, Taoist understanding of food, although it's interpreted in a different way. Yin and yang is understood in a different way.
Right, they have a slightly different classification, but same fundamental principle.
And this principle is very, very helpful in every capacity in life, And I think, however, one has to adapt their food, and there's a huge variety of needs, for each person. But however one adapts their food, the understanding of yin and yang applied to oneself is indispensable.
And yin and yang can be applied to everything in life. We can see everything through the lens of polar opposites, contractive, expansive, up and down, hot, cold, all these opposites. So it has endless applications that are useful, right?
Yeah. In relationship, in lifestyle, in every walk of life,
So-
at work.
Yeah. So even like in macrobiotics, even though food is quite central to how we use yin and yang, macrobiotics itself extends far beyond diet and food. Right.
Oh yeah, yeah, very much so. I mean, we can see the duality in everything,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it's a question of consciously steering ourselves to a harmonious balance rather than an erratic swing from extreme to extreme, which is sometimes, well, not sometimes, a lot of times, but unconscious.
And so for some, like an example, we could say like in the early days, the practice was too young. And when we realized that, then we started to say that we need to become less young, more yin. And we apply that, I mean, that's quite simplistic, but the application really is broad. You can apply that to so many things, and more than that, it works, right? Yin and yang works, right? In practicality?
It works. It works whether you know about it or not. It just works because if you're not conscious of it, you're at the mercy of it. If you're conscious of it, you know, you can steer yourself gently and intuitively. You can't be too rigid because it's hard to interpret it in a rigid way. It's a very fluid, changing thing. So you have to have your intuition engaged with your life.
Right. It's sort of like a guide, you know, that you can use to navigate through life and through everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, what are your thoughts about macrobiotics at large today? I mean, you must have had a huge evolution in your thought process over the years about what macrobiotics is, where it came from, where it's going. So I don't know if you can address that.
There's such a large variety of personalities today, and each of the teachers of macrobiotics, the old teachers and the younger teachers, have such different orientations, I believe, to in their view of life and in their view of the role of macrobiotics. And that's a good thing. You know, I think that's a very good thing. But in general, I think that food, the importance of food is pretty much established in the world. And I think that deeper understanding about family, children, school, work, and all the basic things that comprise an average life, you know, all lives, you know, should be addressed in a way that utilizes this understanding of the principles of yin and yang, or by whatever name you want to call it, the duality and the balance between the dualities. So we're not at the mercy of extremes, so we can harmonize everything where life moves in a more gentle way in some respects, and in a more active way as far as our own biological existence is concerned. Because right now we are very sedentary, you know. Modernity is advancing in a fast pace, you know, and we are all caught up with cars and instant this and quick that and sitting around for entertainment and often cut off from nature.
I was thinking about that.
Yeah. So I think we need to refocus about all refocus on all the things that create a healthy person, that bring up healthy children, that create a family that is strong.
It's like a more integrated approach that connects us to nature and keeps that connection alive, that relationship, something like that.
To nature and to our own nature,
Yeah. Not to over stress the idea of food, but in modern world, a lot of people think that food is just nutrition and that it's just really about like you eat this way and you get healthy and that's it. Even in the whole food plant-based diet and all that, a lot of it's very nutritionally focused, and that is a very important part. But what else is food? Does food have more significance than just being good nutrition for our physicality?
Yeah. After you have eaten a mostly plant-based diet, you notice a very, very dramatic change in your emotions, in your emotional life. Things become deeper but calmer, emotionally speaking. And you can verify that by going off and eating something that you're not accustomed to and see the huge swing.
Like a Philadelphia cheesesteak or something like that?
Or something with sugar in it.
Right, Coca-Cola.
Or both.
Coke and a cheesesteak.
Instantly. Well, even a tuna fish sandwich.
Right, yeah. Yep.
Instant change within maybe not within that day, but within 24 hours.
As soon as it hits your system, yeah.
Yeah, like the next day and the next day, depending on how often you have indulged in, consecutive meals. But yeah, emotional difference, mental clarity. Mental clarity is definitely enhanced by simple, natural food and more direct style of cooking.
Yeah, I remember you driving that point home when we were kids, and naturally kids want sweets, and we go and eat sugar, and then we get cranky, after the sugar high wears off, you get really cranky and tired and whining and crying, and everything's like a horrible ordeal. And you'd point out that we had sugar and it was related, and I remember thinking like, no, it's not. Like, you're young and you don't want it to be about like your favorite thing in the world. You don't want it to be at fault. But yeah, definitely I remember.
I remember that I used to ask you, how did you feel yesterday? And you'd say, fine. How did you feel the day before yesterday? Fine. I say, what's the difference today? And you'd say sugar. And we went through this routine for some years. And then one day, you came home and you said, you know what? It's not worth it.
Right. So, beyond macrobiotics, I know you did some other stuff in over the years. You did some travels and studying, and tell me about that. What was that about?
Well, we lived in Japan during the early years. We spent a year there, and that was very interesting. It was a very difficult time for me because I had a young baby and no babysitters in those days.
And then you got pregnant.
That was when we were leaving. That was you. But yeah, it was very difficult, but also very enlightening and beautiful. Japan is beautiful. I mean, the country is very beautiful, and to see their craftsmanship in bowls, their handwork and their art, you could understand it when you see the country, and the natural phenomena there. Really beautiful.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
I still have yet to visit, but it's on my mind. I have pre-birth memories, I guess. But what you did some other studying besides macrobiotics. So
Yes.
what was, I mean, do you want to talk about any of that?
Yeah. Well, I did some studying on my own, my own reflections and my own contemplations and my own curiosity, more than curiosity, maybe more like my burning questions, my large burning questions. But then eventually, in a more semi-formal way, I ended up in LA with Master Hua Ching Ni and his family and their acupuncture clinic. And I helped in the summer times, I helped transcribe lectures that were turned into books. And I learned many things there. They were Chinese, of course, Chinese. They taught Taoist, yeah. Master Ni was a Taoist master. And eventually they started the College of Tao and Man, something like that, which is, I believe, still thriving in Los Angeles. Yeah. And he wrote many books. It was a good experience. And Taoism really resonated with me at the time. The Taoism that they practiced was very simple and very practical. Yeah.
Now these studies, and you also did some other things with Zen and Native American studies, but they were all driven by a deeper yearning for spirituality, right?
I fall in love with cultures. I think we all do. I think we're at an age where not personal age, but an era where people fall in love with different cultures, And for me, it was one culture after another, And the Chinese culture has taught me a lot, And I really was very much attracted to a lot of literature and books and just understanding more about it. And that went on for a while. And studies with Master Ni and his family were also part of that, Taoism. The trip to Japan was part of that. But then through a set of circumstances, I became involved with Native American culture, which frankly I was very ignorant about, and I had a lot of misconceptions about and even fear, until I took a close look at it, and I saw profound beauty in those teachings and great relevance.
Nice. Yeah, I personally love all cultures. I think they all have great value, so I can relate and understand that.
Yeah. Then we ended up in Kimberton.
Yeah, we did.
And I ended up at Sunbridge College, and teaching over at Kimberton. And I picked up a lot of good information and inspiration from anthroposophy as well, which is very complex. It touches just about every field of life.
Yeah. Now, I know you've had some quiet years, but these days, everything feels so chaotic and crazy. What's your take on everything that's modern life, 2020 and just everything? What do you think? Do you have anything to say about this modern day?
Yeah, it's unwholesome.
It's unwholesome.
But then, there is also a strong desire and movement, more conscious movement among a lot of people towards the wholesome, towards the wholesome in many capacities, not just food, but lifestyle and so on. And I'm hoping that we can add our 2 cents to that.
Yeah.
Soon.
Right. The world needs some sense. Might as well give ours.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you think is next for you? Do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, I would like to have a more synthesized expression of food as it influences our entire human experience, both emotionally, mentally, uh, character development, spirituality, character development is very similar. And the importance of the individual, in this process, the importance of the family in this process, the importance of the community, so individual to family, family to community, community to country, and so on.
No, that all sounds very good. Was there anything else that you want to add to any of this? Any final words before we wrap it up?
Yeah, cooperation.
Cooperation.
Yes.
That's a good word, because it seems like the world is very divided and not getting more cooperative but less. People are wanting to divide it in every different way, all these different groupings. So people should work together, yeah?
Yeah, cooperation between groups that are very similar, and also cooperation between groups that seem to address different aspects of life. Because after all, it's all one life that we are living. We don't have to compartmentalize everything.
Yep. I agree with all of that. Well, Judy, mother, mom, any final words?
Cooperation.
Wonderful. It's great having this interview with you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.